Hey, it's Anna. Welcome back to my channel. We are doing our September readathon, and I have never needed a readathon, I think, more than I needed one this month. It's just been a crazy travel month, and work the past 2 weeks has been more mentally draining than I think it ever has, and I really just need a break from thinking about anything related to work, so I'm so excited to dive into hopefully some great books. Now, there is one book, I don't know if I've ever said this before, but like I have to read this weekend. It's non-negotiable. I must get through it, and it's an arc for A Pretty Implausible Premise. This book comes out the day I'm posting this video, and I'm recording this video only like a few days before I post it, so I really need to read A Pretty Implausible Premise. I don't remember what it's about, and so I looked up the description and it says head-spinning Taylor Swift song level feelings, and I don't think I read past that. I think I was like, oh, sounds like it's gonna be a book for me. Have I had it in my NetGalley for months? Yep. Have I downloaded it to my Kindle yet? No. So, oopsie daisy. So that is the first book I need to physically read. And then I think this just shows how, mentally draining work has been, is I also need to finish, so I have 2 books I need to finish, Get a Life, Chloe Brown, because I have 1 day left on that loan. I am luckily, I think at this point I'm like 2 hours and 45 minutes from the end of it, and so I've listened to the majority of the book, and it is just slow paced, and the switching of perspectives is throwing me off. I really like the messaging of it so far. I love the representation, the talk of chronic illness. It's just a slow book for me. I don't know, and I feel so bad saying that I wanted to like it so bad. And I don't think I'm necessarily turned off to Talia Hilbert books. I don't think the audiobook narrator personally helps either. So I've been having just a hard time like finding a way to listen to it during work, because I feel like I really need to focus, and the accent is a little heavy for the audiobook narrator, and the perspectives switch really without warning, and she doesn't really change her voice between perspectives. I feel like I need to pay extra attention more than I usually need to during audiobooks, so that's been a little hard to listen to during work. So our 2 must get through books are Get a Life, Chloe Brown, and A Pretty Implausible Premise. I do have other books in my back corner because there is a lot of cleaning planned for this weekend, at least in my mind. And I also plan to just use one of the days, either Saturday or Sunday, to do nothing but physically read. So I have 2 more physical books on my list, and these are actually the last 2 physical books on my TBR. I'm pretty proud of myself. The first is The American Roommate Experiment. How many times have we seen me put this in a readathon video? I think like 3 times, I don't know. But I have read The Spanish Love Deception. That was a weird book. If the term milking is in this book, I'm DNFing. I'm not continuing. This book will be done for me. So I want to read The American Roommate Experiment because I've read The Spanish Love Deception, and my favorite part of The Spanish Love Deception was Rosie. So I'm excited to continue on with her story in this book. And then we have Delicious Monsters. I really like Lizelle Samberry. It's just a really long book, and I know that this has some heavy content material. Let me read you the content warnings, because Lizelle's really good about putting content warnings in her books. Okay, so the content warnings are childhood sexual assault, off-page some details discussed, childhood physical abuse, corporal punishment, off-page described, childhood physical abuse, confinement punishment, childhood neglect, gaslighting, grooming, suicide, off-page mention, killing of a goat, off-page described, discussions of fatphobia, body horror/gore, violence, and death. So she always puts her content warnings in the author's note, which I really like. So I feel comfortable enough to read this book. I really do want to read this, especially before her next book comes out next year. And I feel like because it's Delicious Monsters, getting us in the vibe for Halloween. So I am not sure exactly if I'm going to just solely read this book after I finish A Pretty Implausible Premise. I don't want to pick up a physical book until I finish my arc to kind of give me motivation to finish my arc. And then right now, the other audiobook that I have is Night Crawling. I don't know anything about that book either. I need to get better about descriptions, but I don't think I ever will. And then I know something's gonna come off my holds list. I just don't know what, but we'll just have to see what decides to come off. I am recording this early because I am going to try between my 9 meetings on a Friday. 9 meetings on a Friday. I've never had that before. So between those meetings, I am not starting like any type of new project today. I just can't mentally do that to myself. And I worked late last night, so I have one project to finish by 8:30, and then my 9 meetings pretty much start right at 8:30, a little before, depends on when my boss wants to talk to me. And so pretty much after those 9 meetings, I'm gonna get straight into like fully reading. But in between those meetings, I want to try to sneak listening to the audiobook in. I might also try reading on my Kindle for a bit for the A Pretty Implausible Premise arc. I don't know. So I at least wanted to start early on Friday, and then we'll see how many minutes I actually get in before officially being able to step away from my work computer, sit down and read. My plan is hopefully to do that at like 3:30, I think. I don't know. It depends on how long all my meetings go, if anything gets canceled or whatnot. So I'm excited for the lineup of books, specifically the physical books I think I'm most excited for this time around. Unless an audiobook comes off that kind of gets me really excited to listen to it, I feel like I'll have a good mix of reading between the ARC, the physical books, and the audiobook. And of course, last time I didn't get over 24 hours. I'm definitely getting over 24 hours this time. We're not even going to let the thought of not reaching over 24 hours on this readathon come into my brain. Let's maybe get started. We'll see. All right, so I am reading A Pretty Implausible Premise on my Kindle, and it's, how do I say this? I feel like the language, and I feel like it's so hit or miss with YA books, but this is giving me they're talking as if they're younger, but they're seniors. And I feel like that's almost a trope because I have read Better Than the Movies and it was the exact same thing there. So not 100% sure how I feel about A Pretty Implausible Premise yet. So both characters have some type of disorders, let's say. The main character, Hattie, has something where she can taste words, and then the other main character, Presley, has a traumatic brain injury. Now, I don't know why he has a traumatic brain injury. Maybe it says in the description, but both have very unique disorders, and so I think it's kind of interesting to see how they're going to overlap because the disorders have been at the very forefront of both of their chapters so far, because this is a dual perspective book, which I am kind of excited about because it seems like there's a lot of history. So we'll just keep reading the book and see how it goes. I did finish Get a Life, Chloe Brown, and I feel so bad because I really wanted to like this book, but it was just slow paced for me. And then we would skip a lot of time and I wasn't 100% sure where we were, and I just felt like it was just like weirdly paced, and they would have these like big great moments, but then they would kind of fall apart over nothing. I don't know. So I really love the representation and the look at chronic illness in a relationship. It was just written so slowly. So I'm really going to have to think about what I want to rate that one. And then I did start listening to Night Crawling, and I definitely like how all my books are somewhat of different premises. And with Night Crawling, you know, we're following a girl in Oakland trying to get by. The rent just increased. What is she going to do? And the night crawling is what her future job is referred to. I don't know what night crawling means, but I definitely think that's going to be an interesting one to listen to. Currently, I'm almost at 3.5 hours and I am extremely exhausted from work. So I think I'm just going to go lay down and read for the rest of the night, and I'll catch up in the morning, see how far we get. I don't know if I'm going to listen to more night crawling at all, but I'm definitely going to read more of A Pretty Implausible Premise and just see how far I can get. And I'm not even going to look at the percentage of how far I get with A Pretty Implausible Premise until like right before I go to sleep or even in the morning, because I don't want to psych myself out about like not reading enough on the first day. All right, good morning. It's day 2 of our readathon. I have read 7 hours. I read a little bit more of A Pretty Implausible Premise, but then I listened to Night Crawling, and I mainly listened to Night Crawling this morning so far. It's about 9:30, and I can't remember the last time I had like a really chill morning, so I was kind of happy to do that. Now I need to hop back into A Pretty Implausible Premise. There was like a word that one of the main characters said that I didn't know when reading last night, and I feel like if I Google it, I'm gonna get like a major spoiler. So I really want to keep reading to figure out what it means, and hopefully I'm gonna finish it pretty quick. I don't know what page I'm on. Hopefully my next update I'll actually look at my progress, and then after I finish that book, then I'll probably go back to Night Crawling. I am almost 4 hours into the book, I think, and it's definitely more character driven. I'm glad I'm listening to it now that I've read more character driven books, because I don't think I would have appreciated as much if I had read this earlier in like my character driven reading saga. So I'm really glad that I'm reading it now, because I feel like I have a better understanding of a character driven story, and I'm enjoying the story more than I think I would have if I read it a few months ago. So on to A Pretty Implausible Premise. And until I finish that, you know, it's gonna be pretty chill. After I finish that, then I have a lot of chores to do, but I need to finish this arc so that I can keep my good NetGalley rating. All right, so I am almost 13 hours into the readathon, less than 30 seconds away, but I wanted to give a little update before I go and cut the grass because that is one of the chores I plan to do. And I am finished with A Pretty Implausible Premise. So that was my goal before doing any chores, was to finish that book. I'd say it's pretty good. There's just, I feel like with all the books right now, they're dealing with such heavy topics, and I'm starting to get a little bogged down by the heavy material that wasn't only in A Pretty Implausible Premise, but that's also in Night Crawling. So I definitely think I'm gonna switch my first physical book to read a little bit of The American Roommate Experiment, and then maybe try reading a little bit of Delicious Monsters. I don't know. I did like An Implausible Premise. I think the Taylor Swift references were like a little forced, but I did think it was overall a good story, and I liked the character's self-reflection. And some of the twist, it was weird. Like, I didn't think they were plot twists, but then they were to the characters. So I don't know if I just read too much into it. I don't know. And I feel like the writing got more mature as the book went along pretty quick, so that made me pretty happy. I'm going to continue to listen to Night Crawling while I do some of my chores. I am like 4.5 hours away from finishing it, and I feel like the beginning third of it was just a lot of build up to now the part that we're currently in, and I feel like it's gotten a lot more faster paced, still very character driven, but just a lot more going on. So I feel like I like this part of the story, like I'm more invested in it. Not that I'm liking the content of what happens in it, definitely check the content warning, but I appreciate the beauty of the story and the writing that's going into it. I can see why so many people loved this book last year. I feel like I saw it all over book social medias last year. So I'm really curious to see how it ends, because I'm not sure how it's gonna end. And then hopefully after doing some chores, I'm gonna pick up my next book, which is gonna be a physical book. Like I said, I might switch between the two, but I'm leaning towards The American Roommate Experiment, at least to start. All right, we are 14 hours and 46 minutes into the readathon. I know that last month when I did my readathon, it was a little less than 16 hours, so I'm excited to exceed that tonight. It is 7:15, so I definitely anticipate reading for at least another hour and 15 minutes. I will at some point tonight, now that we're in comfier clothes and we've done chores, once I'm winding down for bed, I plan to continue listening to Night Crawling. Night Crawling has definitely grown on me in the past hour and a half-ish, I think, of listening, and I am interested to see where it goes, because this is a story where a lot of the characters haven't really gotten happy endings, and I'm really rooting that the main character does, but I feel like this is supposed to be more of a social commentary on life and, you know, what it looks like to live with not, you know, having your basic needs, and I just don't know if the story's gonna end happy. I really hope it does. I can see it going both ways at this point, but I don't know which way it's actually gonna go. So I've really enjoyed listening to Night Crawling, and I'm going to keep listening to it at some point tonight, but I do want to switch to my physical books. I do also have an audiobook as a backup. I don't plan on finish Night Crawling tonight, but if for some reason I do, I did read Threads That Bind, and the sequel to that, Heart That Cuts, comes out in June of 2024. So I'm starting that fantasy series. Maybe it's a duology. I'll have to look it up, because the last fantasy series that I called a fantasy duology was Fourth Wing, and that's 5 books instead of 2. I don't know. So I'm just going to call it a fantasy series for now, and if it's only 2 books, then great. I'm excited to step into a fantasy book too, because I feel like I don't really have one of those ready to go. And in terms of my physical books, the size of these are just so funny to me, how the different books look. We have The American Roommate Experiment and Delicious Monsters. I might switch between reading a chapter in each book tonight, but I'm leaning towards picking up Delicious Monsters tomorrow and sticking with The American Roommate Experiment today. I think I just need a little bit of like a palate cleanser between Night Crawling and A Pretty Implausible Premise, since those were both pretty heavy books. And so I'm looking forward to hopefully getting a little bit of a lighter read with this book. But I also really love Lizelle Samberry's writing, and so I really also want to get into Delicious Monsters. So we'll kind of see where the night goes, and then obviously switching back to an audiobook to get ready for bed. So we'll see how the night goes, but I'm really excited to read over 15 hours for this readathon. All right, it is day 3 of the readathon. I woke up in the middle of the night and just didn't physically feel good. So I was planning to get up right away and read and do chores, but we're just gonna have to take it slower today, which is fine. It's supposed to be a cooler day out, so any outdoor activities can definitely wait and I won't be at risk of a sunburn or something. We are at 17 hours and 53 minutes. I am really enjoying night crawling. I did listen to quite a bit more of it last night. I think I have about an hour left or something like that. I don't know if that's what I'm going to listen to right away today because I do really want to read my physical books. And the problem is both of them are very good. So Delicious Monsters and The American Roommate Experiment are both starting off super strong. I think my plan is going to be to focus on The American Roommate Experiment because I think that one I could actually finish during the readathon just because Delicious Monsters is so much longer. Plus I was planning on Delicious Monsters being the last book I read this month anyway in lead up to spooky season. So let's see how far we can get. I definitely feel like I'm gonna get 24 hours today. I would really love to get 30 hours, and that means probably also starting Threads That Bind, which I think will be a departure from anything else I've really read during this readathon, which I am extremely excited for. So let's see how long I don't feel very good for. I feel like it was 2, 3 in the morning that I started feeling not very good. So hopefully after a little bit of breakfast, I'll be able to go outside and start doing some chores. All right, so it's almost the end of the readathon already. I haven't done too many verbal updates today because I've been reading, surprising, during a readathon. I'm at 27 hours and 12 minutes. It's almost 6:30. I'm gonna try to push really hard to get 30 hours in for this readathon. My last readathon, I only got 15 hours, so it'd be really exciting to double it. I don't know, I think that would just be something cool. I did read all of The American Roommate Experiment. I felt like this was so much better than The Spanish Love Deception, just the general concept, but I feel like she cannot write spicy scenes. Leading up to the spicy scene, I was like, okay, I feel like this is fairly good. But then getting into the actual spice, I was like, man, I just don't feel like this is very good. So that's my overall take. I think I would rate this a 4 out of 5 in terms of a very light rom-com book. So I enjoyed it from that aspect. Again, I would not read this for the spice. I feel like there are definitely other better, spicier books out there, in my opinion. Then I've been listening to The Threads That Bind. I'm a quarter of a way through it. I'm really liking it. However, I feel like I can't figure out the spelling of a lot of the names, and I'm starting to get confused. I wish I had this one as a physical book just for reference, because I hate Googling and looking up the spelling, because what if I'm spoiling something for myself? So, that's where I'm at there. It's definitely a fantasy book. I'm really enjoying it. Heavy on the mystery, really fast paced. Overall, I'm really enjoying the book. I just wish, I don't know, I almost wish there were, this is gonna sound silly, I wish there were subtitles for audiobooks sometimes, or a glossary in the description where I don't have to Google it. I like to always think about when I'm reading a book whether it would be better as an audiobook or a physical book, and this is one of those where I feel like the physical book would do a lot better. So as I make dinner and I eat, and I'm gonna continue to listen to The Threads That Bind, and then hopefully after I finish those little last minute dinner and whatnot, I'm finally going to get into Delicious Monsters. I've been thinking about the premise of this book while reading The American Roommate Experiment. I've been grateful to finish The American Roommate Experiment during the readathon, but I'm really glad to get back into this book. I'm hoping to make a decent amount of progress. I'm not very far in it all right now, but I'm definitely excited to see where this goes. So I'll definitely update you in the morning, and hopefully I get over 30 hours for the readathon. We'll see. All right, it's Monday morning. We got to 30 hours and 9 minutes for the readathon. I'm gonna be honest, I started getting a little scared while reading Delicious Monsters, and I feel like I had to put it down. I think I could have gone maybe a little bit longer. I was tired, but I wanted to keep reading the book, but I was seriously getting scared, so I had to stop. So let's review the 4 books that I did finish during this readathon, and then the 2 that I'm going to keep reading. The first book that I finished that I think is going to be my lowest rated is Get a Life, Chloe Brown. I did finish it before I had to return it, so that was nice. I think the pacing of this book for me was just a little bit slow. I definitely liked the second half of the book better than the first half. I think the general messaging of the book and being in a relationship with somebody with chronic illness and looking at the intersectionalities of a person, I think was really important. However, I was so confused on the time frame during this book, and the cat confused me a little bit, I guess. I guess for me, the premise was just a little bit too out there for also how real it felt. It was just weird for me personally. I think I want to read more Talia Hilbert books. I think I would want to read this whole series, but I don't know how soon I'm going to pick those up. The next book is A Pretty Implausible Premise. I liked this, kind of coming of age story for both of these. I would compare this to The Design of Goodbye, but The Design of Goodbye, in my opinion, was better than this book. I don't know. It just didn't hit me the same. I feel like the Taylor Swift references in A Pretty Implausible Premise were kind of forced. I was a little confused by the timing in this book as well, especially because I felt like the main character, I don't know, should have talked to her dad more based off of how they described their relationship, and she just didn't. I don't know. So overall, I think the concept of dealing with grief was important throughout this book, and I liked the pacing of it, but it just didn't hit the same with some of those, qualities as the next two books do. I would say my second favorite book from this weekend was The American Roommate Experiment. I said this earlier, I just don't think Elena can write spicy scenes. I just think that definitely brings down the book. At least she didn't say the term milking this time. And I wonder how much of that was influenced by, I assume, what people said online about her using the term milking in the Spanish Love Deception. So weird to me. And I did like this premise overall better. I liked Rosie and Lucas as characters better, and even when I saw characters from the Spanish Love Deception, I was like, what are you doing here? I was like, I don't need this. I don't need to go back to that book. I just want to be in this book. And I definitely think it was a lighter rom-com read amid all of the heavier topics in the other books that I was reading. And then the last book that I finished, which I think was my favorite over the weekend in terms of books that I did complete, is Night Crawling. I think this is such an important book. I feel like this could be something that is definitely in curriculum somewhere, either college or higher level high school. I feel like the discussions that could be held around this book would be extremely eye-opening for everybody involved in that conversation. I did think the beginning was slow, I'm not gonna lie, but once it picks up, I think at around the 3-hour mark of the book, I was hooked. I didn't want to stop listening to it. I definitely preferred it over the physical books I was reading at this time. And I don't know if the beginning was slow just because of, again, this world building in the real world, I think is something that I would struggle with as an author, that I think a lot of authors struggle with, right? Because how much world building do you do for these stories that are fictional, that are placed in real places? I think a good example of this is 100 Other Girls. That book had a lot of New York City descriptions where I feel like if you had never been to New York, you got a really good idea about New York. But if you'd been there, the descriptions were way too much and took away from the story. Whereas with Night Crawling, we get a vibe for the community, but without harboring into exactly what the streets looks like and pounding into what the buildings look like. So we still get a feeling, but I just still feel like that building part was somewhat slow. But I would definitely recommend all of these books. I feel like all the books are made for certain readers out there. Get a Life, Chloe Brown might have been the only one that I don't fully think I was the necessary intended reader for, but the other three I definitely feel like were my vibe. And then in terms of the books that I'm going to finish first for the audiobook is Threads That Bind. I am definitely really liking this book. I love the world. I'm kind of mad that I'm listening to it this early, solely because knowing that there's a second book coming out, I feel like the cliffhanger on this book I can already tell is nasty. There is a lot of world building in this book, which makes sense because it's a fantasy book, and I feel like that world building is taking up a lot of time right now, and I'm like, oh shoot. So this second book hopefully is going to be filled with a lot of action. The second half of the first book I also think will be filled with a lot of action, but then the cliffhanger between the two books I just think is going to be really bad. And then finally, Delicious Monsters. I got a decent bit into it. I'm on page 120. It is a 500-page book, and I really don't think I can read this at night. I do most of my reading between 7 and 9 p.m. What I genuinely think I'm going to have to do is, if I want to read this book at night, I will have to put it down and read a happier book before going to sleep. Because, we're not even, a quarter of the way through. We're almost a quarter of the way through, but we're not a quarter of the way through yet. And I'm already getting scared. There has not been that much scary stuff that has happened, I think, for the
average reader. But just the way Lizelle writes, I'm just so in the world and I feel like I can visualize everything. It's just giving me chills. So I don't know what I'm gonna do. And this is technically my last book on my TBR outside of my book club book. So I feel like I'm gonna have to pick one of the standalone books behind me to just read in accompaniment with this book, especially if I want to read it at night. Overall, I'm super happy with this readathon. I am definitely excited to continue reading. I feel like having these longer readathons definitely just reinvigorate my spirit to read. When I'm actually able to sit down and I don't have to put myself on timetables for reading and I can just relax and live in the world of whatever book I'm in. So I really love doing these and I am really excited for the month of October in terms of different videos coming out, my analytics video that I do every quarter, my first book club video. I'm hopefully going to be doing like a rereading as well of one of my series. I haven't reread a book all year. Every book I've read this year has been completely new to me and I'm excited to go back to one of my favorite series as a kid. So October I feel like is pretty stacked and I hope you'll stay with me during all those videos.